Outside of Kramer's Hentai Adventure and the Adam Sandler dating sim, I'd never really played a visual novel until I picked up the Ace Attorney trilogy for Switch. I remember these games coming out for the DS back in the mid-2000s, but at the time I must have been too busy picking my nose and watching Shrek to play this anime courtroom game with lots of reading in it. But after finally beating these games as a grown man, boy am I glad I got around to it. The first 3 Phoenix Wright games get full marks from me, and my girlfriend, who actually played the entire thing while I sat and watched. I love the chemistry and personalities of the main cast, the absurdity of the cases, the wild twists and turns, the crazy character designs, and that brilliantly catchy, souped-up Game Boy soundtrack. I loved it all. In fact, I even liked it so much that I decided to make Maya's Magatama as a fruity little arts and craft project. More on that later. The Ace Attorney trilogy is a package I'd happily recommend to anyone who's even remotely curious about visual novels, or people who wish there was an anime adaptation of Law & Order. I could write a whole pretentious video essay on how Phoenix Wright broke me or something dumb like that, but really I'd rather talk about how much fun it was to play this game with another person. Unlike Persona 3 and 4, which I recently completed sitting alone in the dark in my underpants, I'm really glad I got to play the Ace Attorney games as sort of a cooperative experience. For a series that lies somewhere between a Western point-and-click adventure and a Japanese visual novel, you'd think that the text-heavy nature of the former genre really wouldn't lend itself well to backseat gaming. It'd be like 2 people holding the same book and reading it together in silence, something I'm sure still goes on in the Amish community. But what do you know, we both had a great time playing these games together. As an Australian with barely any human rights and 12 monthly lockdowns a year, Friday night became Phoenix Wright night. Who needs friends when you've got a guy like Miles Edgeworth? Or Larry Butts? I'm sure there's plenty of visual novels out there which are better experienced either by yourself or with your pants around your ankles, but there's just something about Ace Attorney with a friend that really works. I think it's a similar appeal to watching one of those trashy crime shows like NCIS or SVU with someone else in the room. It's fun to toss things around out loud when you're watching a show like that. Who's this guy? What's he up to? Oh, she looks guilty. Oh, he's hiding something. The 2 of you get to play a pair of armchair detectives, and then, when it comes time to do the cross-examinations, having another brain on the case can really help to figure out a character's motives, retrace the events of a crime, or find that key piece of evidence to poke a hole in a witness testimony. Objection! And then there's the joy of experiencing some of the game's nuttier moments together. If I was playing these games by myself, I probably wouldn't be shouting at the TV in disbelief when a twist in the story came along. But when there's someone next to you who's in just as much shock as you are, suddenly the lounge room turns into Teens React. I'm really not much of an anime guy, but like I said before, I love the character designs in this series. Almost every time we were introduced to a new character, we'd crack up at just how ridiculous some of them look. With how great and detailed the character artwork is, it's still so weird to me that the whole trilogy was first released in Japan for the Game Boy Advance. The first 2 games even came out before the launch of the backlit Game Boy Advance SP. I can definitely picture playing through these games on the original DS, but working your way through those 3 to 4 hour cases on an unlit 3-inch screen while sitting under a lamp just sounds miserable. While I've never played these games on anything other than my big TV, I can understand why some longtime fans think the jump to HD ruined a bit of the visual aesthetic. I'm a huge fan of retro graphics from almost every era of gaming, and there definitely is something to the pixelated sprites from those old handheld versions. But I don't know, just from looking at all those old sprites online and checking out a bunch of comparison videos, to my eyes I think they did a really good job remastering all the artwork and animation for these latest ports. So I guess all of this is to say, don't worry about the nerds who might tell you that you're missing out on the true experience unless you play it on DS. As long as you can avoid the iOS version, the important thing is just to play these games however you can. And if you want to take my advice, I really recommend playing at least a case or 2 with someone else who's keen. Now, before we get into the DIY portion of the video, here's a couple of quick tips for playing Ace Attorney with another person. Give the controller to whoever is the slowest reader. You don't want to be advancing through all these text boxes while thinking, oh man, am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Just hand it off and let them steer the ship. Play each case in nice hour or so chunks separated by the to be continued screens. If you get stuck for more than 10 minutes or so, don't feel too bad about having to use a guide. Looking up every solution would obviously ruin a lot of the fun, but there are some moments in the trilogy which are a little out there in terms of logic. Fellas, when Mia Fey comes on screen, cover your trousers with a pillow. Think deeply about the homoerotic relationship between Phoenix and Edgeworth. And most importantly, have fun. And now, it's time for me to make a fool of myself making a Magatama. If you haven't played these games or Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, a Magatama is a little comma-shaped bead from ancient Japan, which was used for ceremonial and religious stuff. In the Phoenix Wright games, a couple of the main characters use these objects to channel the spirits of people who have passed on to the afterlife. I'm making this for my GF as a little 3-year anniversary present since she enjoyed playing the game so much. I think she'll like it even if it turns out crap, so my only real fear is that maybe she'll like it too much and start getting into cosplay, and we all know what those people get up to. Since I still have very frequent nightmares about failing Year 8 art, I went for the easiest possible route and chose to make this out of polymer clay. I really have zero experience with this stuff, so I decided to enlist some expert advice from Arts and Craft YouTube. Alright, time to start rolling, and man is this more difficult than I thought it would be. Making a ball with a hole in it is simple enough, but actually trying to mold out this teardrop shape for the Magatama has got me banging my head against the table. But after a great struggle, we've finally done it. And since I'm too scared to keep fiddling with it in case I balls it up, into the oven it goes. And while we wait, a video perhaps.
Are you laughing, biatch? You find it funny? You find it funny?
And would you look at that, it's actually come out not half bad. The surface has a few dents and scrapes on it, and around the back of the tail you can see some folds in the clay. But wrap a little bit of yarn around it and I'd say that's good enough for a budget Halloween costume. Maybe all I needed to pass Year 8 art back in middle school was someone who believed in me. Happy anniversary, darling!